Have you ever wondered what it takes to stop an empire? Picture this. The summer sun of 1456 beats down on a battered European city, its walls trembling under the relentless crash of cannon fire. Smoke rises, stones tumble, and the sound of drums echoes like thunder across the plains. Outside the city, 60,000 soldiers, the finest force of the Ottoman Empire, are preparing to strike the final blow. Their leader, Sultan Mehmed II, is no ordinary man. He is the conqueror of Constantinople, the breaker of empires, a ruler feared across continents. And yet, inside those crumbling walls, the defenders number barely half that. Peasants with farm tools, a handful of knights, a weary garrison clinging to hope. By every rule of war, they should be swept away like dust before a storm. But history, as it so often does, had a surprise waiting. This was no ordinary siege. This was the clash where faith challenged firepower, where chivalry stood against cannons, and where ordinary men rose to become legends. It is the story of how a veteran general, a fiery priest, and a ragtag army of believers defied the greatest war machine of the Middle Ages. The Battle of Belgrade in 1456 is more than just a footnote in military history. It is a tale of impossible courage, of strategy born out of desperation, and of knights who lived and died by the code of honor we call chivalry. To understand why this story still echoes today, we must step back into a world of empires colliding, faith on the edge of collapse, and warriors who carried not only swords and shields, but the hopes of an entire civilization. So, ask yourself, how could a city destined for destruction become the stage of one of the greatest upsets in history? How could farmers and monks stand against Janissaries trained from childhood to kill? And what secrets of leadership, faith, and knightly valor turned Belgrade into the fortress that stopped an empire? Stay with us, because in the next few minutes, we will unlock the secrets of this battle, peel back the myths from the facts, and discover how courage and conviction can rewrite the fate of nations. This is Knights, deadliest warriors of the Middle Ages, secrets of chivalry and battle. To understand why the Battle of Belgrade became such a defining clash, we first need to step into the world of the mid-15th century, a Europe trembling on the edge of disaster. Only 3 years earlier, in 1453, the unthinkable had happened. The city of Constantinople, the jewel of the Byzantine Empire, the bastion that had stood for over 1,000 years, had finally fallen. It was a city so legendary that chroniclers called it the Second Rome. Its walls, built to defy time itself, had resisted dozens of sieges. Yet at just 21 years old, Sultan Mehmed II broke them. He earned the title the Conqueror, not by accident, but by wielding the terrifying new power of gunpowder artillery. Massive cannons, cast from bronze and rumored to be made from melted church bells, smashed the unbreakable walls into rubble. The fall of Constantinople was more than the end of an empire. It was a shockwave that rattled all of Europe. Panic spread through kingdoms and courts. If Constantinople could fall, what fortress could stand? Who could resist an enemy that seemed unstoppable? And Mehmed was not done. He saw himself as heir to the Roman Caesars, determined to forge a new world empire stretching across continents. His gaze turned westward, toward the kingdoms of Hungary, Austria, and eventually the rich cities of Italy. But one obstacle blocked his path: the fortress city of Belgrade. Perched where the Danube and Sava rivers meet, Belgrade was more than a stronghold. It was a gateway, Whoever held Belgrade controlled access to the heart of Central Europe. For decades, it had been the last great Christian bulwark, a stubborn thorn in the side of Ottoman expansion. Mehmed knew that to fulfill his vision, Belgrade had to fall. And so he brought the might of his empire north, 60,000 to 70,000 soldiers, the elite Janissaries, disciplined cavalry, and an artillery train of around 300 cannons. His army stretched across the plains, its white tents glittering like a sea of snow. For many observers, it seemed inevitable that Belgrade would share Constantinople's fate. But while the Ottoman forces marched in unity, Hungary, the kingdom Belgrade was sworn to protect, was fracturing. The young king was entangled in political disputes, nobles quarreled endlessly, and fear paralyzed decision-making. When the threat loomed largest, those who should have defended Christendom instead turned inward, squabbling over titles and power. Amid this failure of leadership, two unlikely figures emerged. The first was John Hunyadi, a Hungarian nobleman and one of Europe's most seasoned warriors against the Turks. For decades, he had fought along the frontiers, learning Ottoman tactics, countering raids, and earning both respect and fear as a commander who never backed down. Yet when he called for aid, the nobles denied him funds. He was a general without an army, left to scrape together what forces he could, around 10,000 mercenaries and loyal knights. Experienced, yes, but a mere fraction of what Mehmed commanded. The second figure could not have been more different. John of Capistrano, a 70-year-old Franciscan friar from Italy. Sent to preach against heresy, he found a higher mission in the Ottoman invasion. Frail in body, but fierce in spirit, he traveled across villages, delivering sermons that most peasants couldn't even understand in Latin. Yet his fiery passion transcended words. Farmers, blacksmiths, students, they all flocked to his call. Armed with farm tools and a burning sense of holy duty, they formed a mass of tens of thousands. Undisciplined, untrained, but unshakable in faith. Together, these two men, Hunyadi, the battle-scarred warlord, and Capistrano, the fiery priest, became the twin pillars of Belgrade's defense. One brought military cunning. The other brought spiritual fire. Their alliance was improbable, uneasy, and at times divided. But it was the only hope for a Europe staring down annihilation. And so, as Mehmed's empire marched with steel and fire, Belgrade prepared to resist with a mix of knights, mercenaries, and peasants clutching pitchforks. A battle was coming, not only for a city, but for the soul of an entire continent. The siege begins. In the first days of July 1456, the horizon outside Belgrade darkened with an awe-inspiring sight. An Ottoman chronicler wrote that the white tents of the Sultan's host stretched like a field of snow across the plains. The Danube, Belgrade's lifeline, was sealed tight by an Ottoman fleet of nearly 200 vessels. The city was surrounded, on land and on water. On July 4th, the thunder began. Mehmed's cannons, some weighing several tons, hurled stones that shattered towers and smashed walls. For weeks, the bombardment did not cease. Every day, the defenders patched the breaches with rubble, wood, even furniture torn from homes. Every night, more of the walls collapsed. The noise was relentless, a constant reminder that Constantinople's fate might soon be theirs. Inside the city, panic simmered. Many asked, how could peasants with farm tools possibly hold against the Janissaries, the most feared infantry in the world? Breaking the blockade, July 14th, Hunyadi understood that if the river remained in Ottoman hands, Belgrade would starve. He devised a daring plan: attack the blockade itself. On July 14th, his improvised flotilla of small, maneuverable ships rode straight at the mighty Ottoman fleet. The battle raged for 5 hours. Arrows darkened the sky, ships grappled and clashed, men fell into the Danube's current. Against expectation, the Ottomans faltered. Their larger ships could not outmaneuver the lighter Hungarian craft. By dusk, several Ottoman galleys were sunk. Dozens of smaller boats captured. The blockade was broken. Reinforcements and supplies surged into Belgrade. The defenders cheered, their morale restored. For the first time, the impossible seemed, just maybe, within reach. The night assault, July 21st. But Mehmed had not come this far to retreat. For weeks he continued the bombardment until the city's outer walls collapsed entirely. On the night of July 21st, he unleashed his elite Janissaries. Under the cover of darkness, they poured through the rubble and seized the lower town. Torches lit the night as fighting erupted in the streets. The defenders were pushed back toward the main fortress. For a terrible moment, it seemed the end had come. A Turkish soldier planted the Sultan's standard on the ramparts, signaling victory. But then came acts of desperate courage. Hungarian soldier Titus Dugovic, seeing the flag, grappled the bearer and hurled both himself and his enemy from the wall, dying, but denying the Ottomans their symbol of triumph. Meanwhile, Hunyadi ordered his men to ignite oil-soaked timber in the narrow alleys. Walls of fire split the invading Janissaries from their reinforcements. Trapped inside the burning city, the attackers were cut down in brutal house-to-house combat. By dawn, the Ottoman assault had failed, leaving thousands of dead strewn across the lower town. The unexpected charge, July 22nd. On the morning of July 22nd, Hunyadi ordered discipline. No rash actions. The defenders were to repair the walls, conserve their strength, and wait. He knew his small army could not survive in the open field against the Ottoman host. But fate had other plans. On the outskirts of the camp, a group of Capistrano's crusaders, peasants inflamed by zeal, slipped out to harass the enemy. Ottoman cavalry moved to scatter them. Instead of retreating, more crusaders joined until a full-scale mob surged forward. Capistrano himself, seeing the chaos, seized a large crucifix and charged at their head, crying, "The Lord who made the beginning will take care of the end." What began as an unauthorized skirmish exploded into a mass assault. From the fortress walls, Hunyadi watched in horror. His strategy was unraveling. But then he saw something else: confusion in the Ottoman lines. The peasants' reckless fury had created a momentary weakness. Hunyadi acted. He ordered his heavy cavalry, the knights he had saved for this exact moment, to ride out. Armored horsemen thundered across the field, smashing into the Ottoman flank. Their target was not men, but machines, the massive siege cannons that had battered Belgrade for weeks. The knights seized the artillery, wheeled the guns around, and fired straight into the Ottoman camp. The effect was catastrophic. Soldiers panicked. Rumors spread that the Sultan himself had fallen. Mehmed, in fact, was struck in the thigh while trying to rally his troops. By evening, the once invincible Ottoman army collapsed into chaos. Soldiers fled, abandoning their camp, their weapons, even the precious siege cannons. Belgrade had held. The victory at Belgrade was nothing short of miraculous, but like many great battles in history, it left behind not only triumph, but also mystery, legend, and unanswered questions. A triumph against all odds. Consider the odds once more. An empire's finest soldiers, tens of thousands strong, equipped with the most advanced siege artillery of the age, defeated by a patchwork force of knights, mercenaries, and peasants. Military logic says the weaker side should have collapsed within days. Yet Belgrade stood. How? Some historians argue it was the perfect blend of discipline and zeal. Hunyadi's knights provided the precision strike, while Capistrano's peasants injected unpredictable fury. The Ottomans could counter one, but not both together. Others believe the terrain itself favored the defenders. The rivers, the narrow streets, the fortress design. And yet, even with all those factors, few can explain how an undisciplined mob could terrify the most disciplined infantry in the known world. The legend of Titus Dugovic. Then there are the personal stories, the legends that turned this battle into myth. Chief among them is the tale of Titus Dugovic, the soldier who pulled an Ottoman flag-bearer off the wall, sacrificing himself to prevent the Sultan's standard from flying over Belgrade. Was this act of heroism real? Chronicles differ, but the story lived on, inspiring generations as a symbol that one man's courage can turn the tide of history. Capistrano's holy madness. Even more puzzling is the charge led by Capistrano. By every rule of command, it was madness. Charging headlong with peasants armed with farm tools into an organized army should have ended in slaughter. And yet, somehow, it didn't. Some chroniclers describe it as divine intervention, that the zeal of faith itself carried the crusaders forward, terrifying their enemies. Others suspect psychological warfare. Perhaps the sheer irrationality of the peasants' charge unnerved Ottoman troops, making them believe something greater was at play. After all, an enemy who does not fear death is one of the most dangerous opponents. What cannot be denied is that Capistrano's decision, whether reckless or inspired, created the moment Hunyadi needed to unleash his knights. Without that spark, the battle might have ended differently. The Sultan's despair. Another haunting mystery surrounds Sultan Mehmed II himself. Contemporary accounts tell us that, wounded and humiliated, he barely avoided suicide when he realized the scale of his defeat. How close did the conqueror come to ending his own life that day? We may never know. But the image of a man who once broke Constantinople, now retreating in despair, speaks volumes about the psychological weight of Belgrade's victory. The price of victory. Yet triumph was costly. In the aftermath, disease swept the camps. Within weeks, John Hunyadi, the mastermind of the defense, was dead. Months later, John of Capistrano, the fiery priest who had led the peasants, also succumbed. The two men who had achieved the impossible never lived to see the fruits of their victory. But their sacrifice was not forgotten. The bells that rang across Europe at noon, a tradition still alive today, originated from Pope Calixtus III's order to pray for Belgrade's defenders. After the victory, those bells became a celebration instead of a plea. Even now, centuries later, when you hear the midday bell, you are hearing the echo of that desperate, glorious summer in 1456. Lessons from Belgrade. The siege of Belgrade is more than a tale of battle. It is a reminder of what makes history human. At its heart, this was not just knights against Janissaries or cannons against walls. It was a struggle between despair and hope, fear and faith, surrender and resistance. Think of the peasants who picked up scythes and hammers, men and women who had never seen war up close, suddenly facing the most professional army of the age. Think of the knights, weary from years of fighting, who still saddled their horses to charge into a sea of enemies. Think of the friar, old and frail, lifting a crucifix above his head and charging at the front of a mob, not with weapons, but with words and unshakable belief. What drove them? Historians debate tactics, strategy, and logistics, but perhaps the simplest answer is conviction. They believed their homes, their families, their faith, and their very world were on the line. And in that belief, they found courage greater than steel. A turning point in history. The consequences of that summer cannot be overstated. Belgrade's victory halted the Ottoman advance into Hungary for 70 years. It bought Europe time to prepare, to adapt, to survive. Without Belgrade, the map of Europe might look very different today. Vienna, Rome, perhaps even farther west could have fallen under the Ottoman banner. Yet beyond strategy, the psychological impact was immense. The conqueror, once thought invincible, had been stopped. The myth of Ottoman inevitability was shattered. Across Europe, the news spread like wildfire. The bells rang, people celebrated, and for once, hope returned to a continent living in fear. The human cost, but victory always comes with a price. The plague that swept through the camp claimed both Hunyadi and Capistrano. These two men, so different in life, one a hardened general, the other a fiery preacher, became united in death, their legacy sealed by the triumph they had won together. It is a sobering reminder, even the greatest victories are paid for in lives, sacrifice, and grief. Yet perhaps that is why they matter so much. Belgrade was not simply saved by armies, it was saved by ordinary people who chose to fight when everything told them to flee. The echo of the noon bell. Today, few remember the details of that battle, but many still hear its echo without realizing it. When church bells ring at noon across Catholic and Protestant lands, they are continuing a tradition that began with Belgrade. What was once a call for desperate prayer became a symbol of miraculous triumph. It is a living reminder, sounding daily, of a time when faith and courage changed the course of history. Final reflection. So, what can we learn from the siege of Belgrade? Perhaps this: history is not always written by the largest armies or the most powerful rulers. Sometimes it is written by a farmer who refuses to surrender, by a priest who dares to inspire, by a knight who charges against impossible odds. Belgrade teaches us that in moments of crisis, greatness can come from the most unlikely places. And it reminds us that even when defeat seems certain, courage, unity, and conviction can still turn the tide. As you reflect on this story, ask yourself, what would you fight for if everything you loved was at stake? What would give you the strength to stand when the odds are hopeless? If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it, talk about it, and keep its memory alive. History is full of moments like this, moments when ordinary people did extraordinary things. Subscribe to History in Motion to journey deeper into the past. Like this video if you believe courage still matters today, and leave a comment below. Which forgotten battle should we uncover next? Because history is not silent. It speaks in bells, in legends, in stories like Belgrade. And together, we will keep it alive.